Welcome to Legitimate Matters. This is a very special chapter in Legitimate Matters. You're watching the first of 3 episodes about a topic that I am sure you're going to find intriguing and extremely engaging. How many times have I watched the news and have seen a report where an innocent person years later is found innocent because of false witnesses, DNA evidence, and all kinds of variables that prove this person's innocence. But my question becomes, whatever happens to that person? Who's accountable? How could something like that even happen? And then whatever happens to those individuals after we hear that they were finally exonerated and set free? Well, this story is about a story that takes place on June the 19th in 1996. A 17-year-old individual named Jorge Collazo and a friend, Michael Sanchez, were walking in the Bronx when a car pulls up, 2 men get out, and ultimately one individual, Jorge Collazo, is murdered. Detective asks Sanchez, the person that was with that person, and another person who was operating a food cart that was nearby, to look through the books of photographs that they had on file and to identify who they might believe were the suspect. Long story short, they ended up speaking to my guest, or they ended up identifying, supposedly, allegedly, my guest who is on the show today. Richard Rosario, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Richard, this happened back in 1996 when you got a phone call that the police wanted you for question.
Yes.
What happened at that point?
Basically, it's what happens in most homicide cases where there's an alibi. An individual is contacted by the police directly or contacts a family member. In my case, they contacted a family member, and they said they were interested in speaking to me and questioning me on a crime that had been committed in the Bronx, June 19th, 1996. Now, for an innocent person, and I want to be clear on this, when you're being sought for something you didn't do, and especially a crime such as heinous as a murder, you know, I've never committed such an act in my life. But when you're being sought for charges like this, there's nothing in your mind that really tells you that you could be actually convicted if you've never done it. In my case, I was in another state.
You were in Florida?
I was in Florida when the crime actually happened.
Wow.
So having contact with my family, and this is well documented, I kind of, you know, I was first in disbelief. I possibly thought it was a misrepresentation of what the police told my family member. My family are Puerto Rican immigrants, low income, you know, poor. We don't have money for lawyers, or, you know,
right.
But we live within our means, and my family, you know, I thought they could have been mistaken about what, if anything, the cops could be looking for me for, much less a murder. So I decided, you know, well, I'm gonna go back and see what's going on, and it was the biggest mistake I made in my life.
So you were in Florida when this crime was committed.
Yes.
When you got news that the police wanted to question you with regard to this crime, you voluntarily jumped on a bus. Yes. Made your way back to New York. Yes. And then turned yourself into the police.
Yes.
And then what happened?
What's funny is that, you know, initially what I thought was a mistake was an actual homicide that had occurred in the Bronx. You know, my family wasn't imagining things. They did say homicide, they did say murder, and, you know, my family did tell them, well, he's in Florida.
He's in Florida.
I mean, they got the first notice that I was in Florida at that point. And so when they come to my mother's house, they knock at my mother's door. I'm the one that answered the door for the detectives because, I mean, I'm just here to clear something up. Whatever it
Sure.
is, whatever date it is, or whatever the facts may be, I never killed no one, and I've been in Florida. So if it happens to me June 19th, well, I'm good.
You're
I've
just
been
like,
in Florida.
let me go clear this up.
Yeah. So I opened the door for them, and it started out pleasant, because I had spoken to them by phone, a couple of minutes before and said, hey, I hear you're looking for me. Well, I'm here in New York, and I'm going to go into the precinct on my own, and we'll solve this. And the detective said, no problem. And I hung up. I went back to my mother's house, and they had preempted me and came to my mother's house.
Okay.
Now, once again, I look out the window, and there's a bunch of cars that pull up in front of my mother's house, and I didn't feel any fear at that moment because, once again, I'm here just to clear something up.
Right.
I've been in Florida. I have nothing to be afraid of or
Right.
nothing to fear, or at least I believe at the time. So they come in, they were pleasant with my mother, and they basically said, and not paraphrasing anything the police said because I don't want to make a statement for them, but I remember something in terms that if you didn't commit the crime, we'll clear this up at the precinct.
And when did this take a turn?
Right before we left, right before I stepped foot out my mother's house, and it really brings me back to a bad moment in my life, they said, well, before you step out, we have to cuff you. And I'm saying to myself, well, if I'm volunteering to go with you,
Why do you need
why
to
do
be
you
cuffed?
have to cuff me? And they said it was police procedure, and they put the cuffs on me and took me to the precinct. And I remember the chill I felt when they walked me out, and it's a summer day, everyone's out, and they walked me to the car, and I felt like everybody was looking at me like I did something.
Well, we're going to go to break, but when we come back from break, we're going to find out exactly what happened after this whole circumstance did not go exactly the way Mr. Rosario expected. We will be right back. You do not want to miss this.
If you were convicted of a crime you did not commit, what would you do? How would you feel to have your basic human rights stripped from you in a matter of seconds?
Each day, thousands of crimes are committed, and each day, thousands of people nationwide are convicted of crimes they did not commit.
Eyewitness misidentification is the #1 factor that causes most wrongful convictions. This is due to the mind filling in blanks with things that seem right or things that they hear from others such as the police, media, and other witnesses. If you are unsure if the person that stands before you committed the crime, do not put an innocent person in jail. Don't convict the innocent.
How often does our justice system get it wrong, convicting innocent people of crimes they did not commit? A new project by the University of Michigan Law School and the Center for Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern University School of Law tries to answer that question. In the last 23 years, more than 2,000 people have been convicted of serious crimes and later exonerated, according to the National Registry of Exonerations. By far, the largest segment was almost 1,200 defendants falsely convicted because of large-scale patterns of police corruption, generally in drug and gun cases. Of the remaining 873 defendants exonerated, nearly half were wrongly convicted of murder, and of that group, 101 were sentenced to death. On average, it took more than 11 years for a conviction to be set aside. Why does the justice system get it wrong? In homicides, the biggest problem is perjury and false accusation, most often by supposed eyewitnesses. False convictions in adult rape cases are primarily based on mistakes by eyewitnesses, while false convictions in child sex abuse cases are often for fabricated crimes that never occurred. 2,000 exonerations may seem small in a nation with more than 2.3 million people behind bars, but there are far more false convictions than the report contains. Most false convictions are never formally challenged, and those convictions that are successfully overturned receive little or no attention from the media, according to the report's authors.
Welcome back to Legitimate Matters, a special chapter in a 3-part series. Well, before we went to break, I was asking Richard about the scenario or the turn of events that took place, and what you shared was there was a murder in the Bronx.
Yeah.
You were in Florida at the time. You came back to New York voluntarily. attempted to turn yourself in, but the police showed up instead before you had a chance to make it to the precinct. That was very surprising. And then ultimately after that, they actually arrested you?
Yes, and it was not just shocking, but I was afraid. Because as soon as I got into the precinct, everything changed. They went from asking me questions about this crime that occurred in the Bronx, and I'm telling them I've been in Florida, to them attempting to make me confess to a crime I didn't commit. Even though I had told them, for hours that I had been in Florida and I was forthcoming with this information. And it was a lot of pressure that they mounted on me, and it was difficult.
And they were pressuring you, trying to force you to commit to a murder that you did not commit.
Yes.
How did you respond at that time? How did you respond to that pressure?
Well, in the beginning, I was afraid, but after, I'm 20 years old, and after hours of being interrogated and being told by public servants, by police, after I was forthcoming with information of where I was, and they're trying to force me to confess to a crime I didn't commit, I felt indignant, I felt angry, and I responded in kind.
And then with these witnesses who eventually turned out to really, in my opinion, based on the information that I read, were false witnesses, but you ended up going to trial.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so tell us about that.
It was the most horrible experience and the most lonely feeling in my life. To be accused of a crime I didn't commit, and to see the deck stacked against you. Because if the police had been doing their duty to me as a citizen, they would have just done their investigation, saw that my information was valid, it was viable, they could find the information, they could have vindicated me then and avoided 20 years of an experience that was horrific.
But there were witnesses that said that
Yes.
could testify that you were in Florida at the
Yes.
time. As a matter of fact, a very good friend of yours, I read, who is now a sheriff
Yes.
in Florida,
Yes.
you were at his house when his wife was...
She went to labor, yes.
So the police didn't do any type of investigation, and these were not the only witnesses, there were more.
Yes, there were 13 alibi witnesses, and what's amazing is that they never bothered to make one call.
Wow.
They never bothered to contact any of the witnesses, and 20 years later,
Wow.
everything that I said finally panned out. But what's more amazing about the witnesses is that 20 years later, we come to find out that at the least, the witnesses were influenced by police misconduct into selecting my photo in particular.
I also read that one of the witnesses, the vendor,
Yes.
never saw the shooter,
Yes.
but said that he did, right? And then also Sanchez, who was also on the scene,
Yes.
also didn't see, or was a false witness as well.
Okay, well, what happened was the hot dog vendor at trial, he finally said, well, I remember when he was pressed about if he's seen the shooter, and he said, I remember what the police showed me, and I remember the picture of the guy that they showed me.
Wow.
This was the first revelation. And then the DA said, no, do you see the person in the courtroom? So the hot dog driver said, no, I don't see him.
Wow.
Sanchez was the first one to identify my picture, allegedly.
Allegedly.
We come to find out that as soon as the police contacted Sanchez and asked him at the scene, did he see the shooter, Sanchez allegedly said that he never saw the shooter.
Wow. Let's fast forward a little bit. You,
Yes.
at some particular point, enlisted the Exoneration Initiative, which is
Yes.
is what the acronym is EXI, right?
The Exoneration Initiative, yes.
Okay. And I often hear people talk about the Innocence Project. What's the difference?
The difference is the Innocence Project is an organization that represents and litigates on behalf of innocent people, but their main focus is on DNA-based cases, meaning cases where not only is there evidence that you weren't at the scene or alibi evidence, but the most damning of evidence is DNA. So, with most of these cases, they're difficult after you've been convicted, as
Sure.
it is. But with DNA, it makes it more easier for them eventually to prove, like in the case of my friend Anthony DePippo, that you weren't the one that committed the crime. With EXI, the organization deals with non-DNA cases, so it's 10 times as difficult for them to not have no evidence at all presented against a defendant at trial, and it's hearsay for them to prove years later that the witnesses are lying because there is no DNA. You understand? So their investigations are more expensive. The litigation is more it's more aggressive, and they get more resistance from the court because, you know, once you're convicted, it doesn't matter whether you're innocent or not. And unfortunately, that's how our system deals with it, and that's why EXI is tasked with dealing cases like this.
Well, it's my understanding, and based on what I read, that EXI actually did investigation, but this was, of course, many years later, if I'm correct.
Absolutely.
And they were able to find new evidence.
Yes.
But even after they found new evidence, I don't even want to finish the sentence, Richard, because there are so many tragedies here, starting with a murder and also your story as well. But new evidence surfaced that the EXI presented to the district attorney at that time.
Yes.
And what happened?
First of all, I would like to take this time to give my condolences to the family of the victim, because, you know, they were told a lie for years that they may have believed, and I hope that, you know, they look at the facts of my case and see for themselves that I'm an innocent man accused of doing something to a man I've never known and a loved one. So I understand the family is aggrieved that the wounds are being opened again. But the problem with this is that years later we come to find out that there was evidence pointing at a different direction. There was a motive. There was a possible different theory that could have been presented at trial, but the police went through lengths of covering this information up that would only be found 20 years later.
This story continues to unfold and becomes more horrific as you find out more, as you read more, as you hear more. When we come back from break, we're going to find out exactly how there could be so much evidence that was presented to the district attorney, but still, Richard Rosario served 20 years before he was exonerated. Stay tuned, come back, and find out what happens next.
Today, an innocent person is standing trial for a crime they did not commit. Today, an innocent person is writing for help from a prison cell. 245 people have been exonerated by DNA testing, but researchers believe that at least 40,000 innocent people are still behind bars. For them, the answer is the Innocence Project, an organization that uses DNA technology to free those who've been wrongfully convicted of a crime. For more information about how you can support the Innocence Project, go to mylifetime.com.
According to the Innocence Project, studies estimate that anywhere between 2.3% and 5% of prisoners in the United States could be wrongfully incarcerated. That's as many as 100,000 innocent people behind bars. So why is the U.S. convicting so many innocent people? The Innocence Project looked at all of the cases in which a prisoner was later exonerated of their crime due to DNA evidence. They found that 70% of exonerated prisoners were misidentified by an eyewitness. This is a common occurrence, as studies have shown that eyewitnesses are notoriously unreliable. People are also less able to recognize faces of a different race than their own. So white people are more likely to misidentify black people, and vice versa. 47% of cases involved some sort of improper forensic science. While DNA testing is reliable, other forensic methods have been questioned. Things like hair microscopy, bite mark comparison, firearm tool mark analysis, and shoe print comparisons have not been as scientifically validated. These forensic clues are not concrete evidence like DNA, but they are often treated that way in court. They also found that more than a quarter of these cases involved false confessions or incriminating statements. In some cases, police officers or other officials led or forced defendants into false admissions of guilt. And then finally, 15% of these cases involved bad information provided by incentivized witnesses, jailhouse informants or co-conspirators who provide false information to lower their own sentence or to point the blame away from themselves. Innocent victims are usually wrongfully convicted based on a combination of these factors. If you'd like to hear how one inmate was exonerated after 30 years locked up, click here now. For over 3 decades, Sledge pleads his innocence, asking that the forensic evidence used against him be DNA tested. But the key evidence has gone missing.
Welcome back to this very special chapter of Legitimate Matters, the first of a 3-part series. I'm speaking with my guest, Richard Rosario, who spent 20 years in prison, wrongfully convicted. Richard,
Yes.
when we were in the last segment, we were talking about the fact that this information, the witnesses and new evidence was presented to the district attorney at that time. And what happened to that?
The motion was ultimately denied, as well as countless others throughout the years. Over 8 motions were denied.
Over
to
8
vacate.
motions were denied to vacate. And then eventually, on March 23rd, 2016, now 20 years later, okay, when the new district attorney comes in, Darcel Clark, and of course with the EXI presenting their evidence, you were eventually released from prison. So is it safe to say that the EXI and Darcel Clark's, specifically her conviction integrity unit, was a key turning point in your case?
Well, it is true to some respects, but it's a little bit misleading. There were a lot of factors related to my case that were about to come out, such as the evidence you spoke about, the new evidence, an NBC documentary that was being aired immediately before I was released, and a lot of factors regarding Darcel Clark entry into office as a district attorney without voters voted her in. There was a lot of suspicion of how she obtained her job and her role as a district attorney in the Bronx, and all those things combined made it the perfect timing for her to release me.
Wow.
But not without trying to cheat me of my right and my honor to be vindicated in front of the world in public.
Okay, and then I understand that at your hearing, you actually shocked the court.
Yes.
How did you tell us about that?
Well, once again, I had been the only one forthcoming with the truth. So at that point, Darcel Clark was under information in a file that had been said by her office and her predecessor, Robert Johnson, that had been lost for 12 years. So this file appears, and she said she would be willing to let us review the file, and she was also reviewing it herself to make a determination on dismissal, and she did not let us review the file. They withheld the file, and they said that they would continue the investigation and determine that my attorney's mistakes led to my wrongful conviction, and I felt that was so inappropriate and so just egregious that I told the judge that I would prefer for him to keep the case open until she concludes the investigation and fully exonerates
and
me.
finds you completely innocent. Yes. And finds you completely innocent. You know, this is a horrific story, but how did you even find the strength to push forward for 20 years, Richard? 20 years. How did you do that?
I got the fortitude from a combination of things. I was born in Puerto Rico, you know, in poverty, but, you know, poverty to me is different from what other people see. And I came to the United States in that same poverty, and, you know, we always had the attitude that we would make it by, me and my family. So that strength and the indignation of having been treated with such callous disregard by the same people that's supposed to be protecting our children, our community, and our family, it really made me indignant and want to stand up for something, and that gave me the courage and the strength. That included my children, great supporters, my attorney Carl Lawrenson, who is my mentor, my friend, the Exoneration Initiative, Glenn Garber, Rebecca Freeman, you know, great people stood behind me for a lot of years fighting all the way to the end, even when I was denied.
Including your wife.
Including my wife.
Which is amazing. Your wife, as far as I'm concerned, is also a hero.
She's definitely a hero.
She's a hero as well.
And a victim as well.
And a victim. She's a victim and a hero. And I applaud your wife, Minerva.
Yes.
We're going to acknowledge her in the next
Absolutely.
chapter because she deserves a lot of
She's
credit.
A beautiful and a great human being.
Well, you're blessed. With everything that you've been through, you're blessed. But there are many other families out there. There's so many other families who have loved ones that have been wrongfully convicted, and they're currently serving time. I want you to look in that camera and share in that camera, you know, just encourage someone, Richard, because you have a story.
Absolutely. And what I want to tell the people out there, the daughters and sons, the mothers of men and women that are across the nation suffering and lingering in prison for crimes they didn't commit, never give up. You know, justice is what we seek from our public officials, what we demand. And if we all stand together and I stand with you, your loved one will see their freedom and their justice would be had by the hands of the people. We have to stand with each other, no matter where it's at across the country, and help all exonerees and all those wrongfully convicted in all our respective states. And that's what I would never lose hope.
Well, what I want to say is that, first of all, Richard, thank you for being here, but we're not finished.
Pleasure.
We're not finished. We're going to continue to talk about this in our next episode. So we're going to ask our viewers to hang in there with us because next week we're going to continue this conversation. And if you want to find out how the U.S. judicial system continues with such injustice across the United States, and to really find encouragement and to find out what is really going on in our judicial system, I encourage you to tune back in because there is so much more to this story. Richard Rosario is a human being. He has a life that was taken away from him through politics, through false witnesses, gross incompetence within the legal system. And you may not be experiencing this today, but you might be experiencing this tomorrow. There needs to be changes made across the United States in our judicial system, and on legitimate matters, we're going to continue to address these problems. Why legitimate matters? Because you, whoever you are, whoever is watching, you are legitimate. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not. You're legitimate and you matter. Tune in for the next episode of Legitimate Matters and a continued conversation with Richard Rosario. Thank you for watching. For more information and ways you can support the Exoneration Initiative, please go to www.exonerationinitiative.org or email them at info@exi.org. Hi, I'm William Paris. I am so excited about my new talk show, Legitimate Matters. My topics are inspiring, informative, and sometimes controversial. For show topics, upcoming guests, and hot topics, follow me on facebook.com/Legitimate Matters or on my YouTube channel, Legitimate Matters. Now, this show is for you because you're legitimate and you matter. Legitimate Matters.